What is up, everybody? Well, with the release of Avatar: The Way of Water this past weekend, we now have 9 films in the James Cameron filmography to talk about. So, per usual, when it's a director I'm really passionate about, we're going to do a ranking of all of his films. So, from worst to best, all 9, right now coming at you. And I'll say this about James Cameron. It is really easy to forget how fucking incredible of a director he is, because he's somebody that doesn't pop up that often. You know, he's only made Avatar movies for the past, what, like 20-something years? So it's easy to kind of lose track of how many awesome best of all time movies James Cameron has delivered us. In the 9 films that he has made, I would only give a negative review to 1 and give a passable review to 1. That's 7 films that I give really high praise to. That's a hell of a track record. So anyway, starting off at the bottom, number 9, the worst of James Cameron's films, technically isn't even really a James Cameron film, and that's Piranha 2. Is there any James Cameron ranking that does not have Piranha 2 at the bottom? Seriously, like anybody on Earth? Nonetheless, if you take this movie at face value, it's a really shitty B-movie ripoff, basically, of Jaws. It's not really worth talking about. I've never heard anybody say that they're a fan of this film. Maybe you can get some schlock out of it. You can get some goofy fun, have some rowdy friends over and just make fun of how bad the movie is. That's about as far as you can go with it, but this really shouldn't even be on this ranking because James Cameron only worked on this film for a week. If you don't know the history of it, essentially they wanted to make a sequel to Piranha 2. James Cameron was this up-and-coming director trying to break out, trying to get some work, and the producer of Piranha 2 wanted to direct the movie himself but was not allowed to. And so the conspiracy that is out there that has all but been proven is that he went out to find a underdeveloped director with no history, with no pull whatsoever in the industry, hired them, let them work on the film for a week, and then said, oh, they're fucking it all up, I gotta take over and direct myself. And that's basically what happened to James Cameron. He spent a week on this film, and the vast majority of the rest of the production was done by the producer of this film. So he's only got the directing credit because of a technicality. Now moving on to the films that are actually directed by James Cameron, number 8 is going to be The Abyss. Now this is the only first-time watch on this list. This is one of those movies that I just never got around to. I honestly never really heard anybody talk all that praiseworthy about it, so that usually tells me there's nothing all that praiseworthy about it. So never made it a priority, even though I love all the other James Cameron films for some reason. So I finally sat down and watched this a couple of nights ago, and I watched the special edition. That wasn't the one that I would have chosen, but that was the only copy available, which is another thing. Why are so many James Cameron films so fucking hard to find? True Lies, looking at you. So it was about a 3-hour movie, and I could see sci-fi people really getting into this. Maybe some of the effects that are in this movie were much more impressive in the late 80s than they were when I watched it now in 2022, of course, but the story just didn't really interest me all that much in this movie. It's well done. I would still give it a positive, you know, like 3 out of 5, something like that. I would recommend it to certain people. There's not anything inherently wrong with it. It's just not a movie that I thought was all that interesting to me, especially when I look at all the other James Cameron movies. Usually the story and the characters are just what drives me, what makes me love those movies. So aside from the fact that I love Ed Harris and like watching him, and it was cool to see Michael Biehn be a villain in this, which was one of the more entertaining spots of the movie when it turned into kind of a thriller, it just wasn't really a story or a concept or, you know, subject matter that really interested me. Checking out the deep sea, the abyss of the sea, the uncharted area of the sea, and finding aliens. Okay. Number 7 is going to be Avatar: The Way of Water. Now, don't get me wrong, I've only seen this movie once, and so this very well could move up on the list. And for context, I gave this a 4 out of 5 when I reviewed it. A 4 out of 5, and it's my number 7. On the good side of things, visually, this movie is unbelievable. It was a once-in-a-lifetime experience being able to check this out in theaters at the IMAX 3D, at the world's tallest IMAX at that. Just a visual thrill ride. You put on the 3D glasses, you just escape into Pandora. It is so immersive. It's unbelievable how they were even able to get some of these shots. Like, it's a technological masterpiece. Unfortunately, though, I'm still underwhelmed in the story and the characters of Avatar. Now, there's an argument to be made that maybe the story and the character arcs are a little bit better in this movie. I think that they're pretty damn close, so it's really just kind of a coin flip for me. But there's less of a templated story in this one and more kind of going into some different things that aren't just like the Fern Gully, Last Samurai, and Pocahontas storyline that was in the first film. But I still feel like the visuals are the star of the show, and that's where all of the time and energy is getting dumped into, to where Jake Sully and Neytiri and their family, they're good enough characters, but none of them are really all that stand out for me personally. And just like I said with The Abyss, when I look at the James Cameron films that I love, it's always the story and the characters that I talk about first. I'm like, man, I love this story, I love this person, I love their character arc. And when you get into both of the Avatar movies, I just don't really say that. You know, I talk about the escapism, I talk about the world building, I talk about the imagination. And so these, by default, being that I'm a story guy and that I love characters the most of the movie-going experience, these are the movies that kind of default on the lower part of the list just because they haven't quite come up to par on that side of the movie making for me. Now, when we get an Avatar film that gives us unbelievable visuals and has an amazing story or really good character arcs in it, that's going to be like serious top tier James Cameron. But as much as I enjoyed Avatar: The Way of Water, and I would recommend everybody check it out in theaters while you can, it's still on the lower end of the list for me. Number 6 is going to be Avatar. Now, again, this and Avatar: Way of Water, they might as well be a tie for me pretty much, and they could swap over time. But what edged out this first movie for me was two things. It was the pacing. I do think it's a little bit better paced film. It doesn't have that real bogged down middle section that Avatar: The Way of Water does. And also just the magic of an origin story. Getting introduced to this world, getting introduced to the rules and the lore of Pandora and what the Na'vi do and the conflict between humans and the Na'vi and all of that. And so inherently I find the first film just to be a little bit more interesting, at least as of right now. But pretty much everything I said for Avatar: The Way of Water you can apply here. Visuals, 3D, special effects, escapism, world building, all that stuff is top notch. It's immaculately done. The story and the characters, while sufficient, while good enough, just they're not the star of the show. Number 5 is going to be Titanic, and while this was not a first-time watch for me, it was actually the first time that I sat and watched the movie from the first moment all the way to the end. I've seen Titanic probably 7 or 8 different times in different pieces. It's just one of those movies that I've always been around while it was playing. As a kid, I never had interest in it because when you grew up in the 90s, this was the romance movie of the generation. Leo DiCaprio was the poster guy and all the girls and had him on the walls, and he was the dreamboat, and then that fucking song was playing for like a year and a half, it felt. So in the 90s, Titanic was this big pop culture icon. And so as a kid and as a guy especially, I was like, I ain't watching that shit. As an adult watching it, it's very easy to forget how genuinely good this movie is, because it is the romance movie, the romance blockbuster of the 90s. And so it's always going to have kind of that pop culture sense to it more than it does when you're actually looking at the quality of the movie. And when you watch it as an adult, when I watch it from start to finish now, the core romance between Leo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet, very good characters. They have a lot of chemistry with each other. There's no wonder why they became kind of the it couple for a few years there, maybe even a decade or so. You have unbelievable set design. The way that they were able to craft the Titanic, especially just in the capsizing scenes whenever the thing is sinking and raising up and coming back down and breaking in half. Like, it's got so much to offer, because you can have just the regular old period piece romance section of this movie, then you have kind of the more action-centric thriller side, and then you have the disaster movie side. And I think all three of them are done masterfully by James Cameron. So while this is not necessarily the type of movie that I'm going to grab off my shelf first, I might even watch Avatar more often than I watch Titanic. It's actually surprising to me as I've gotten older to watch this film and realize how genuinely great it actually is, aside from just my memories of it being this big pop culture thing. Now we're getting into some movies that are some of my absolute favorites of all time, and number 4 is going to be True Lies. Where the fuck's my Blu-ray? That's all I want to know. So True Lies is James Cameron teaming back up with Arnold Schwarzenegger and delivering one of the best action movies of the 90s, one of the best action movies of all time, honestly. It's got such a great balance of action and heart and comedy. You have Arnold Schwarzenegger as this super spy that keeps his occupation secret from his family. You got Jamie Lee Curtis as the typical housewife and just is completely oblivious to everything that her husband does. Even though he looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger, she thinks he just goes into an office. And the movie is paced out so well with all these different little aspects of their lives that they're going into. So it starts off just kind of a typical spy movie. You got Arnold Schwarzenegger doing all all the espionage stuff and sneaking into a party and trying to find these terrorists. And then eventually it turns full-blown comedy at one point. He thinks that his wife's sleeping with Bill Paxton. He starts using all of his resources to spy on his wife. Then she finds out who her husband actually is, and it's just one of the most badass action movies ever from that point all the way to the end. There's not really anything negative I could say about this movie. I think it's damn near flawless. I kind of wish that I could watch it right now. Like, go pull it off my shelf and watch it right now. James Cameron, what the fuck, man? I'm gonna rant about that until we get one. We're getting a Blu-ray for The Abyss next year. Still no word of True Lies. Coming in at number 3 is going to be The Terminator, one of the best beginnings of a franchise ever. This is still James Cameron whenever he is... I mean, technically, this is his first movie. Let's just be honest. I mean, yeah, Piranha, yeah, whatever the fuck. This is technically his first movie. What a first movie to have on your resume. For a lower budget movie that was shot on a shoestring budget, the effects that he was able to get back in the day is awesome. One of the best storylines that kind of, similar to Titanic, has all these different concepts going on, sci-fi action, especially a lot of horror in this first one. I do classify this first film as a slasher film. And then you have this awesome, really well done romance in the middle of it, where you have Kyle Reese and you have Sarah Connor, to where you don't even realize that they're going to be romantically involved throughout most of the film. You keep hearing about John Connor, you keep hearing about her son, that's why he's there to protect her, and they keep building up John Connor so much that when they actually kind of consummate their love for each other, and then you realize that is how John Connor is created. It's one of the most creative uses of time travel I've ever seen. I mean, it's easy to forget how a classic like that utilized that concept so brilliantly. And then if you just want to focus on the action and the horror and everything like that, I mean, the Terminator is one of the greatest characters of all time. You got Arnold Schwarzenegger here very early on in his career. This is the movie that kind of catapulted him into the box office behemoth that he became in the 90s. And he is just spot on. The way that he uses the mannerisms, his laser focus, just coming through like a freight train, is iconic. I mean, what more can you say about the Terminator? I feel like I've talked about it ad nauseum, so has the world. It's one of the greatest movies of all time. Coming in at number 2 is going to be Aliens, one of the best sequels of all time. You have a movie like Ridley Scott's Alien. Who the hell wants the job of following that up? Well, James Cameron did. You know, there's the story that he was pitching the movie. I don't know if this is true or not, but it's a cool story, where he walked into the boardroom and he just wrote Alien on the board and looked at all the producers and everybody, and then he wrote an S and was like, yeah, bitch. That's what we're doing. So this movie takes everything that Alien established and makes it bigger, makes it louder, makes it crazier. And I do personally prefer Aliens to Alien. Love what Alien does, but Aliens being a little bit more of the action horror movie. You get the Marines brought in here. You get the Queen added in. And there's this really great storyline going on of this theme of motherhood, to where you have Ripley that has been in hypersleep so long that her daughter back on Earth has now aged fully and died, and while she was asleep. So she wakes up, finds out about all that, and then finds this little girl Newt stuck on this derelict planet where the xenomorphs are running free. And so it becomes kind of a mission for her to regain her motherhood, to protect this child and become her surrogate mother, and then has to go against the Queen by the end of it, who is the mother of the alien race that everybody's trying to wipe out. So it's just one of those perfectly crafted movies. Whether you want to be scared, on the edge of your seat, you want to see some action, you want to see some great characters, you want to have a really good storyline, this movie has everything that you could want. But coming in at number 1 is Terminator 2 Judgment Day. This is my second favorite movie of all time. And I'll be honest with you, as much of a diehard fanatic as I am, which is my number 1, there's days where I'm like, but is it my number 1? I don't know. Terminator 2 is the greatest sequel of all time to me. I mean, this takes everything that was done so brilliantly in Terminator and ramps it up to 11. It's one of the most amazingly paced movies I've ever seen, to where there's just action set piece after action set piece after action set piece. The movie has no fat on it whatsoever. And even if you do watch the longer cut of it, the special edition cut, I think the little bit that we get here actually adds context to the movie, to where that's a really good version, but the theatrical cut, the lean and mean cut, is a brilliant version as well. And so from the beginning of this, where Arnold comes back and you have the swapped roles where he's the protector now, the introduction of the T-1000, the greatest villain that this franchise has ever given us. You have John Connor here played by Eddie Furlong, the best version of John Connor that we've ever had. And the way that they kind of expand the character of Sarah Connor from the first movie, who is this timid, everyday girl, just regular person, into this warrior that she is in Terminator 2 is one of the best character arcs of all time. And so just on an action front, this movie's unprecedented. I mean, it's over 30 years old, and I think that all of the action and all the special effects still hold up to better than some of the movies that we get today. The character arcs that we get here, especially with Sarah Connor, is some of the best that he's ever given us, James Cameron. Story-wise, I mean, it's just a brilliant sequel. There's not much else I could say about it. I mean, just Terminator 2 is one of those small handful of movies in existence that I would say is absolutely 100% perfect. Well, that's it for this one, guys. That is my ranking of James Cameron's films. If you enjoyed this, please click over here for a list of all of my other director rankings if you want to check that out. And I'm also going to put my review of Terminator 2 up here for you to check out. Please like and share this video. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss all of my end of the year lists coming up, top 10s here in the next couple of weeks. And as always, thank you for watching, and remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.